This is a new SEC podcast. We're going to give you a season grade for the Auburn Tigers. This season, they had some high moments, some low moments. And so we're going to talk about their overall grade and how they did on the offense, defense, coaching in the season. Hunter, what are your first thoughts when you think about Auburn football for the 2024 season?
I think it's a tale of two halves of the season, honestly. Like the way that they started the season set them back a little bit from, how they performed at the end of the season. They put themselves behind the eight ball. They had a tough schedule ahead of them, having to go on the road to Georgia, on the road to Missouri, on the road to Alabama. But at least they were given the opportunity to play a bunch of home games at the front end against Arkansas, Oklahoma, Cal. The issue was that they lost those games. So when looking at Auburn's season, it's kind of a tale of that. They set themselves up for failure that by the time they started clicking, it was a little bit late to do so. But they did turn it on a little bit at the second half.
They definitely did turn it on a little bit in the second half, and that's the best way to describe their season, a tale of two halves. The second half of the season, they won 3 of their last 5 games, including 2 SEC wins for them. The unfortunate part was those were the only 2 SEC wins they had in the season. That first half of the season, the main story was the turnovers and the quarterback play, which takes us to our offensive grade. We both had their offense hovering around average. What was the reason for that with guys like Keandre Lambert-Smith and the guys like Jarquez Hunter?
I think it was the consistency of the season where Peyton Thorne, finished the year strong. He played great against Alabama. He played great against A&M in that overtime win, 4-overtime win. The issue was the beginning of the season, the interception problems early on, the way that the offense wasn't really clicking. You had young receivers coming in, but you had Keandre Lambert-Smith, you had Jarquez Hunter. Both of them kind of silently had really, really good seasons. Peyton Thorne silently turned it on. It just felt like throughout the season, defensively, they were staying in games and the offense wasn't able to score enough to win. Only 17 points per game on the road and points per game scored. That's, only 6 Power 4 schools were lower in that category. So they weren't scoring enough for me personally to feel like their offense is graded any higher than the C+.
Yeah, I think I was right there with you. And you talk about their offense not being able to put up the points needed to win those games. That was where, when I think about the season, the Oklahoma game was right in grasp, right? They damn near outplayed Oklahoma in that game yardage wise. Ended up with a loss. The Arkansas game was right in grasp, right? I think we're playing Hank Brown in that game as well, from the quarterback position. So there wasn't a stability at the quarterback position, and you're getting out, you're outplaying teams, but not winning in those games. The bright spot within that C+ was the fact that they had offensive weapons and Cam Coleman and Keandre Lambert-Smith. Keandre, having over 900 yards in that season, up 400 from his or 300 from his previous season at Penn State, but putting it together to allow them to win games, it felt like the defense had to carry a lot throughout the season just to keep them in some of those games.
So, the offense wasn't scoring. They had the young guys. They had, you mentioned Cam Coleman. They're adding Eric Singleton for next year, Perry Thompson, Bryce Kane. They're going to have a good core next year. They're going to have to, get the running back room back together, but they're adding new quarterbacks. I think the offense will get better in year 3 under Hugh Freeze with what he's done. But that brings us to the defense. So, where offense was only scoring about 23 points per game, which isn't good for an offense, the defense was only giving up about 23 points per game, which is pretty good for the defense. And I think that's really the bright spot of this team, all things considered, is that in many times throughout the season, the defense was keeping them in games. Missouri, if you only give up 21 points, you think that your offense might be able to do it. Vanderbilt only giving up 17, you think that your offense should be able to do it. So I thought the defense was really solid all season.
Yeah, I really did think the defense was really solid. And you took the example I was thinking about with the Vanderbilt game, keeping them to only 17 points and keeping Missouri to 21 points. I mean, I remember we were texting about that game, and Auburn was in it pretty much the entire game. It took some heroics from Brady Cook at the end for them to barely lose that game. That was because of this defense, right? And Peyton Thorne offensively was able to start to clean up the turnovers, which is a main reason why Auburn wasn't able to win those games, such as a Missouri and a Vanderbilt. But this defense was really carrying the way for them this season. A lot to build on going into next season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they were great at stopping the run, 3.3 yards per carry allowed. That was top 15 nationally, 57% opponent completion percentage, top 20 nationally. Like they were showing out, and it's just It's unfortunate the way the games went with how the defense was playing. So, I think a lot of that still will carry over into next season. I think that, looking at both sides of the ball cumulatively, offense and defense, the talented pieces were there. It didn't necessarily all come to fruition on the field. You had a great running back, a great receiving core. All things really, Peyton Thorne was a good quarterback. He just didn't have the best games in certain moments, like, losing the Oklahoma game, for example, when he had the opportunity to make a game-winning drive. So, that brings us to where I think coaching is a big piece of this. And I think a huge way that I look at coaching is how your team shows up, how you prepare your team. And when you start out the season, year 2 with Hugh Freeze, you start out the season with a 5 home game stretch. 5-0 isn't unreasonable when looking at the teams that they played. Arkansas and Oklahoma were fine teams, but those are teams that Auburn could beat. I think 4-1 is more realistic and probably what they were expecting to leave this stretch with. I don't think that they were thinking it would go 2-3. That plus a couple of other things throughout the season, losing to Vanderbilt, losing to Missouri on the road. I think all of that, you don't bring in Hugh Freeze, you don't get rid of Harsin, you don't make these moves for the same thing. You don't do it for a 5-7 season.
Absolutely. You don't do it for a 5-7 season. And I think when I think about coaching and how I grade it, I'm looking at what are you doing with the pieces you have in front of you? And this team had a lot of talent around it. I respect Hugh Freeze for believing in Peyton Thorne and riding with him for the second straight season, coming off of that season with 21 touchdowns and 10 interceptions or 16 touchdowns. He had confidence that Peyton was his guy. And I think that he played a key role in that overall coaching grade of how this season went and what he was able to do to, provide support for second half adjustments for the quarterback play. Like, he was brought in, from my understanding, because of what he can do at the quarterback position, what he can do for the offensive side of the ball. And that was the weakest part of the team this past season. He is, of course, getting the saving grace of coaching a good game against A&M, one of their biggest wins of the season. But the collective coaching and what the expectation was taking on a contract like his was at least competing for SEC championships. And we're not sitting here saying that they had an SEC championship quarterback, but they're expecting, the coaching to play a role into getting this team to that position.
Yeah. And I think looking forward, the seat is warm and hot for him. I think there's the expectation that next year is kind of the one to do it. Like, he has the quarterback pieces now. It's not Peyton Thorne. It's not, now he has Jackson Arnold. He has Deuce Knight. He brought in the Stanford transfer quarterback. He's got a good room there. Like I mentioned earlier, returning a good receiving core. I think really the only thing that's his saving grace in all of this is how well he's been recruiting and how well he's been doing in the portal, bringing in, Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. They're doing really, really well when it comes to recruiting, especially in the state of Alabama. And as long as that continues, I think, if he can get to 6-7 wins, that's not going to be a problem for Auburn to keep him around as long as he's continuing to recruit and build the team. But I don't think he can have another 5-win, miss a bowl season. Vegas had this team at 7.5 for their win total, coming in at 5, not making a bowl is just undershooting the expectations. But he's doing well in the offseason pieces. So, to his credit there.
Yeah, he's doing well in the offseason pieces. That's undeniable, especially in this portal era. I think, ultimately the thing that's important for Auburn fans, if I'm an Auburn fan, like, you need to be beating a Georgia. You need to beat an Oklahoma. You need to beat Vanderbilt. It's like, that's great. You're recruiting and you're out recruiting other programs potentially. They need to see the results on the field. And I think that's undeniable. The recruiting is a lagging indicator of the results on the field. But if he can't win games, I would expect this program to not be able to retain a lot of these recruits, because these are top guys who want to win and play at winning programs. Hugh Freeze has all the capabilities to make this a winning program. It's a completely different dynamic these days. We've seen the success at Ole Miss before. We've seen it at Liberty, of course, but he's got to win games, I think, to keep these guys. And so it's good to have it. He's making money. Can he save it? Can he win those big games that Auburn fans expect to win? This is not a lower tier prestige program in the SEC. They're expecting him to win top games. So I think for that assignment, when your main wins are going to be an A&M and a Kentucky, you're brought in to be able to beat Arkansas. You're brought in to be able to beat Oklahoma, as mentioned. Vanderbilt's. It's a D from a coaching perspective this year.
Yeah, and you need to get a win in the Iron Bowl at some point in your career. You can't let it keep going, Alabama's way. And that, that brings us to the final grade here before the overall, and that's the season grade. Wins are what matters. No moral victories. The season expectations were a little higher than what they are. I think that making a bowl is the bare minimum for the Auburn program, and that didn't happen this year. So that's where the season grade sits at. added the just not winning games. You know, they're winning games out of conference. You know, with UL Monroe, Alabama A&M, New Mexico, losing to Cal, but 2-6 in the SEC just isn't going to make it's not going to be a mover for you, and it's not going to continue to excel your program. So, without diving too much into it, unless you have anything else to share there, I mean, the season itself, just the win-loss column result was not there.
The win-loss column result was not there, and I think anybody who looks at the schedule can see that. But I think it was like, we're not going to have PTSD here. We're not going to forget or have amnesia. Like, it was the way the team looked in these games, in these losses. Strong games for Hugh Freeze and his team were moral victories. The Vanderbilt game, the Missouri game, and of course a couple of the wins. So this season did not give them what they wanted. 0-1 out of conference against Power 4 competition, losing to Cal. 2-6 in the SEC. No bowl game. A C- is really a byproduct of the upside we saw in their wins and what he was able to do with the play at the quarterback position. Like, that's kind of my thoughts there.
Yeah, and it's carried by the defense, and really there's positives to look at. Again, I said no moral victories, but there's positives to look at because of how close a lot of these games were. The Oklahoma game came down to the wire. The Cal game could have gone differently. I mean, that was the turnover game, the infamous turnover game. Like, some of these things could have gone differently. I see upside for this team going into the year. We had high expectations. I thought that Auburn was going to be really, really good. I had 8 wins projected for them. I think C- is fair for where it sits right now. I think that's a fair grade. And we'll see where they go. Like we said, they're hitting the portal hard, recruiting well. I think that this team will bounce back strong next year behind, I think Jackson Arnold will be the starter, and Deuce Knight will get some playing time down the stretch, but we'll see where this Auburn team can go.
We'll see where they can go, and they should feel extra excited about Eric Singleton. You talked about it earlier. I feel super optimistic and bright about the direction of the program. We're going to be doing season grades for some of the other teams, and some teams have had good seasons, but the recruiting, these concerns, I don't have those concerns with Auburn at all. And we had Philip Dukes on a couple weeks ago here, and he was talking about what they're doing on the recruiting side, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. So, optimistic about the future, realistic about the right now. That's our season grade. Thank you for tuning into the USC podcast. Like, follow, subscribe.